and I have like a zero Welcome to Media Path. I'm Louise Palanker.
And I'm Fritz Coleman.
Today we are setting out on a media path that is deep and rich and lush and scenic and circuitous and curious and confounding and elegant and so many additional descriptors illuminating complex beauty. It's the creative path of Randy Newman as conveyed to us by his biographer, Robert Hilburn. Bob's new book is called A Few Words in Defense of Our Country, the biography of Randy Newman. It's a sensational read, and we are thrilled to have Bob with us. First, Fritz, what else should folks dive into this holiday season?
Can't wait. Well, here's what's streaming on several platforms right now, Hulu and Disney Plus, Prime. It's called Rivals. It's a British production set in the 1980s England. It's a competition between two powerful rivals that finally come to a head. It's based on a novel by Dame Jilly Cooper. It's a black comedy. It's perilous drama in the middle. Rupert Campbell Black is an old money British MP, banging heads with Lord Banningham, known as Tony. Now, Tony oversees Corinium Broadcasting, an independent television network. The two men are sparring for notoriety and wealth, and mostly women. The scene is the Cotswolds, which is an upper-middle-class suburb outside of London, and it's a great place for a comedy of manners set in the 80s. It's kind of more sophisticated and more stylish, absolutely fabulous, one of my favorite hysterical British shows. It's outsized upper-class shenanigans, outsized sexual tension, outsized sex, lots of attractive humans. It's a fun show. You have to suspend a little of your disbelief in the plot lines occasionally, but it's worth it. It's called Rivals. It's good Christmas candy.
I know you're just in it for the naked tennis. I know you, Fritz.
There you go.
All right, so I watched Blitz on Apple TV. Have you seen this?
Yes, I have.
This is beautiful. When 9-year-old George's mother puts him on a train to safety in the English countryside during World War II's London Blitz, George is not having it. He hops the train to hoof it back home, and when you add bombs, guns, and looters and subtract Uber, GPS, and cell phones, you get one harrowing journey and one frantically anguished mom. The cinematography in this film is brilliant and stunning. The story is thrilling, and the performances are wonderful, but Blitz is not just about London in the thick of World War II. It's about a mixed-race child's experience within that madness. A young life, already a minefield, now taking on fire from above. The racism that reveals itself even as Londoners desperately grasp to survive the siege inflicted upon them by history's most notorious racist is vivid and shameful. Director Steve McQueen brought us 12 Years a Slave and Windows. His work here is masterful. George is played beautifully by young Elliot Heffernan, and his mother, Rita, is Saoirse Ronan. You'll find Blitz on Apple TV.
I saw it. This little kid is going to be a star. He's so poised, but he's very quiet.
Yeah.
And he's inside himself. He's a great actor. And I've seen every World War II movie because I watched the History Channel, otherwise known as the Hitler Channel. Mm-hmm. And every aspect of World War II has been covered in that, but not the life inside the tubes, inside the subway there, and I thought it was spectacular. Unbelievable cinematography. It was really cool.
Really, really, really well done. Let's introduce our guest, if you'll have us. Robert Hilburn was the chief pop music critic and pop music editor of the LA Times from 1970 through 2005, and he's more recently brought us books about Paul Simon, Johnny Cash, Bruce Springsteen, and John Lennon. His most recent offering is the definitive Randy Newman biography, A Few Words in Defense of Our Country. And we welcome you to our show, Robert Hilburn.
Great.
We've been looking forward to this, Bob.
Great to see you.
Gosh,
How involved was Randy in this project, and have you received any feedback from him?
Well, it's interesting.
He didn't want you to do it. He didn't want anybody to do it.
When I started off to write books, leave the Times, I wanted to do major artists, almost writing as if these were statesmen, like this was a person you're going to be, 50 years from now, you're going to still look up these people with a lot of respect. And Paul Simon, everybody knew his music, okay, but he didn't want to talk. He didn't want to. There's been a biography of almost every person who's ever stepped in front of a microphone, except Paul and Randy, because they didn't want to participate. They didn't want to have their story told. They felt uncomfortable about sharing private things in their lives. And that was one thing that's similar between the two of them. Plus, they're both great songwriters. So the idea, when I go to Paul, it took 3 or 4 months to convince him. And I finally said, look, it's your legacy. You've got to, people are going to want to know about you 50 years from now, and someone's going to write about it, so you ought to have it in a way that's accurate. And so then I go to Randy after that. And with Randy, he's very self-deprecating. Who cares? He goes, to me. And I say, Randy, you're very important. And a big thing with him was that Paul had done it, because he's a big fan of Paul, and he knows Paul thinks about everything.
And vice versa. Paul was a big fan.
Yes. But Randy is really the fact that that Paul did it was what finally. It took 4, 5, 6 months before he agreed to actually do it, and for reasons that we'll talk about and I'll explain in the book.
Yeah, Randy, kind of a paradox, because he didn't want to talk about himself, but he didn't care if other people did, including his own children, revealing whatever they wanted as long as they were honest.
Bless you. You actually read the book.
Oh, yeah.
That's what's great. That's what, when you do a lot of interviews these days, and I've done a lot of them, podcasts or news, people don't often read the book. They'll read the liner notes.
We pride ourselves in that.
Well, that's very nice. That's a very good.
We really do.
They'll read the liner notes. They'll read the back. They'll read this and that. But and that takes away part of my thing, because that was a surprise I was going to spring on you. But yes, I found that when you started talking to him about music, anything, he's somewhat reserved, because his family, his uncles, Alfred, Lionel, and Emil, were the royalty of film music. Alfred won 9 Oscars. He got 65 Oscar nominations. He was the head of 20th Century Fox Film Music for 20 years. And little Randy would listen to the family gatherings when the uncles would make fun of actors. They would come on, they'll come on the set and they brag about what they're going to do and how much money they're making and how great the next film is. They're just a bunch of jerks. Randy, you don't do that. You let your music speak for yourself. You don't speak about it. You don't brag. You don't get involved in that kind of stuff. Okay, so that's one thing that hits Randy. The other thing that hit Randy was that he saw how hard it was to write music. Alfred was insecure. He thought it was all a fluke, his success. Don't go into this, Randy. Don't go into this kind of world. Randy, his uncle would get so nervous before a concert, he would throw up in the bathroom, and he would sometimes, Randy would sit there while he's writing, composing something, and he would turn to Randy, an 8-year-old, is this any good? I mean, asking an 8-year-old if that's any good, how insecure.
That's empowering, though, for an 8-year-old. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, but see, all that stuff gradually, but again, the father pushed Randy into following in the footsteps, because he wanted to be in the tradition of his brothers and that musical side. And so Randy studies piano from the age of 5. He goes to UCLA, studies composition for 3 or 4 years. He's on the path, but he's increasingly intimidated by it. He becomes almost paralyzed. I can't do this. If this is so hard on those great musicians, how am I ever going to do it?
But what's interesting is that if he thought that going into scoring would be more challenging, he winds up sliding in there. But like what he did attempt to do in the 60s was actually way more high profile than what his uncles were doing, because he kind of came up in the times, but the 60s pop music became the cultural phenomenon, and he finds himself in the thick of it, and his songs are being covered by massive artists, and he thought that was less of a leap than film scoring, which he wound up doing eventually anyway. So he was always challenging himself.
Well, what happened is, and I think this is one of the great, there's 2 things I always talk to people when I'm trying to explain why this is an interesting story. One is millions of people can hum You've Got a Friend in Me, and they know it's L.A. because they play it after every Dodger game. But they don't know that 95% of the songs he wrote were socially conscious songs about what Randy thinks are the shortcomings in the American character.
It was satire. They missed it completely.
But it was racism, it was sexism, it was greed, it was homophobia, it was immigration, all the topics that people are talking about today that have divided our country. He was writing about these from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. He's been warning us about this division for 50 years, and nobody in the years I've been covering pop music, 1970 to now, including Dylan, has talked about America's problems with as much consistency and purpose as Newman. No one even close.
Yeah, he's had it in stark relief from jump. Like, he understood it better than we did, and now it's being realized. Like, he was extremely prescient. But a lot of folks who just listen to the music and sort of bop along are still confused about the unreliable narrator. And so explain what Randy was doing this whole time and how he was usually not singing in his own voice.
Yeah, one of the key breakthrough for him was, well, let me get back to your question, though, about him going from classical music, movie scores, to pop music.
Right.
The other great story I tell people is he met a person when he was 1 year old who was 3 years old.
Oh, Lenny.
A family friend. And that person's father owned a record company.
Yeah.
And Lenny Waronker. And Lenny wanted to be in the music business too, but not as a musician. He wanted to find people and nurture people. So at the age of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, he's listening to Randy playing the piano, doing all this stuff. And so he's thinking Randy's writing better songs than these people at the record company. I've got to talk him into it. But see, Randy's got the blinkers on. His family expects him to go into classical music, so I can't do that. But Lenny keeps saying, and finally he says, you got to write these songs. And Randy realizes that if he does that, he can escape from the pressure and the intimidation of the family. He said, it's not easier doing pop music, but I would always have somebody there to take my back. Mm-hmm. He says, Lenny was my spine. He was my motivation. He was my courage. He was everything. And so look at that. A person you meet at 1 year old, 2 years old, becomes your mentor. He becomes president of Warner Brothers Records. He produces Randy's albums, and he's always there to say, that's great, Randy.
And he did it at a time when people didn't get Randy. He was his biggest advocate within the business to try to convince people that this was a good investment.
Well, yeah, because when he starts writing songs, he writes it for a publishing company. And back in this is the early 60s, there isn't rock and roll yet. I mean, there's not Bob Dylan kind of rock and roll or Beatles rock and roll. And so you have these people sitting in the Brill Building in New York, great songwriters, Carole King, Lieber and Stoller, but they're writing songs for other people to sing. Mm-hmm. And so this is Randy's company was not with that movement yet. He was supposed to listen to the radio and copy what's on the radio and write. And those were mostly love songs back in the pop pre-55. And Randy hated it. You know, he tried. He did his best. That's what I'm supposed to do. But he didn't have his heart at it. And he finally realizes after Dylan comes along, you've got to write something you care about. And so one of the first songs he writes is maybe his most famous song, I Think It's Gonna Rain Today. Mm-hmm. And now Streisand's recorded it, Dusty Springfield, Peter Gabriel, Bobby Darin. And the great thing about it is, though Randy kind of put it down after he wrote it. He said, it's kind of, I'm just kind of making fun of Paul Simon and Simon Garfunkel. It's such a sad, sweet little song.
And he also didn't like it afterwards because he thought it was revealing too much of himself.
So and he's never said anything about it. So when I would talk to him, when I would try to get deeper than his initial comment, he would often, you could see him leaning back, and he was getting a little bit uncomfortable. Now, we'll get to the family was really uncomfortable, but even the songs, and he didn't want, again, remember the uncle say, don't tell about yourself, because people will use that against you. So he writes, I Think It's Gonna Rain Today, and he finally told me after 45 minutes of discussion of the song that the reason he didn't like it was he thought it was too close. Now, that meant it was he's the guy who thinks it's going to rain today. He's the half-empty glass. Mm-hmm. And, he sees everything as difficult. Everything's a problem. A friend of his who's very close to him said she wakes up in the morning and it's a beautiful day. Oh, I can't wait to get downstairs and get started. Randy wakes up, sees the same beautiful sky and says, oh, I think it's going to rain today. He doesn't want to go downstairs. He doesn't want to do interviews. He doesn't want to do anything. He wants to go in his den and watch television, or that's more these days.
Let's talk about his darkness. He had a childhood where he was bullied a lot. He had his cross-eyed, his vision issues, and he was bullied, and he was smaller than other kids. And do you think he suffered clinical depression, or it was just his attitude about stuff when he was younger?
Well, I don't know. That is a mystery. You know, his brother is a cancer doctor. There's the word for it. I don't know.
Oncologist.
Yeah. And he thinks Randy really has an ailment that makes it difficult for him to be too happy or too sad. He's kind of middle level. And it again, he doesn't want to, but part of the thing about him not talking about his problems, he doesn't want to say anything bad about his family. He doesn't want to say anything bad about his father, who had a lot of tension with him. He was very proud of Randy at the beginning because he wanted Randy to be in music. He was proud, but after he started getting successful, the father was jealous of him, and he would put down and stuff he said. He wouldn't listen to him. So, and the cross-eyed, he would go in school and kids would taunt him, and he would end up walking backwards in the hallway so that kids wouldn't see him. So that's terrible. And any kind of bullying, and he was a huge baseball fan, and a music fan, and he grows up in Pacific Palisades, this wealthy area and stuff, and he can see some of the injustices in the world. Why are these people all so privileged? And then he would watch on televisions, he'd see Watts and riots and why is there so much other trouble? He didn't have a black classmate until he got to UCLA. So it was a different world he saw. And he realized that that was what he wanted to write about. That was finally the thing that when he leaves Metric Publishing and stops writing songs, copying on the radio, he wants to write things he cares about. And the first one was, I think it's going to rain today. And after that, he sat down and said, well, how can I avoid making that mistake again? And that's where he comes up with because that's the thing from literature where you write in the voice of another character. In all those songs you hear of that 95%, he never says, I did this. He's not a prototype. He's taking a character who expresses the badness that he sees in society, and they're speaking. He thinks the absurdity of their words is more powerful than the first-person protest.
Right. It's just hard for folks to grasp that concept within the construct of a 3 or 4 minute song. If you're reading a novel, you understand whose voice you're reading. But in the songs, you hear them in the radio, you hear them in a store, you hear them at a party in passing, and you're thinking, Randy Newman is saying the N-word.
Well,
and a lot of folks, maybe this interview will help a lot of folks better understand what it is
that's right. See, 95% of the music he's written has never been played in the radio. Because disc jockeys, we can't play Rednecks. I mean, it sounds like we're endorsing our Sail Away and other songs. Who's he talking about? Is he talking? Homophobia? Is he for or against it? So it's too sophisticated. It's too subtle. So I'm saying all this music that I'm telling that made me want to write the book, none of it's been heard in America, largely. By more
he was
than
a great
a few hundred
student of
thousand.
history, and especially the Great Flood. He wrote about Louisiana in 1927, and that's where you really see his advocacy for the common man, the downtrodden, how the government screwed these people, and it's quite beautiful. And the fact that pasted against the Pacific Palisades upbringing with not running into a black guy till he got to UCLA really shows you that he was very aware of the inequities in American life from a very young age.
Yeah, and the thing is, it was torture for him to write songs because he was great at composition, he's great at words, but he has to come up with the idea, how do I express racism in a way that doesn't sound like it's a lecture, or it doesn't sound like it's a protest song. And so he would sometimes, and what you refer to, he would read he'd study about something before he'd write a song. He wouldn't just start a song and says, you got to be better. He would point out the evilness of people's behavior. And this flood in 1927, which was the biggest flood in America at that time, there were all kind of people started writing songs about it. Blues singers, not Ma Rainey, but on and on, Charlie Patton. And even Dylan 10 years ago writes a song about that flood, and they all did it the same way. It's all from the voice of the person who got injured. Oh, my baby got wiped away in the flood. Oh, traditional protest music. Randy said, I don't want to do that. So he studies all these books and tries to find out what caused the suffering, and it was the terrible inability of the government, federal government, state government, city government, power brokers. They didn't protect these poor people, white and black. They just let them die. They just let them. And the sad final line of the song is it's these people, the victims who are singing this song. They're trying to wash us away. And so then Katrina comes up, and it's the whole thing over again. And the song becomes almost like a national anthem in Louisiana. I mean, a state anthem in Louisiana. He plays the New Orleans Jazz Fest, and the audience is singing with him. It's just beautiful. But see, he's got the ability to reach people on that level, but you can't reach people unless you get heard. No.
And Sail Away, another thing, which is a great look at slavery, sailing into Charleston Bay, and that was again the undefined narrator, but he was able to tell that story in a non-judgmental way. It was so beautiful.
Yeah, it's a slave trader, and he's trying to tell all the native young African men, come along. You don't have to climb trees and swing with the monkeys anymore. You can come to America as the promised land. And it was going to be a video. And he had a great line for the video. When they walked off the boat, he was going to have a man standing there handing all those young men a basketball.
Oh, God.
Isn't that great?
He had a great sense of humor.
Yeah, he really
which
did.
Probably was a defense mechanism for what he experienced when he was younger. But he was really funny. And all of his, I saw him at a coffee shop in suburban Philadelphia called the Main Point.
Yes.
Main Point's a very famous coffee shop.
Yeah.
I saw he and Odetta on the same bill.
Wow.
And his interstitial commentary, he was so funny. He's a really funny man.
Yes, he really is.
And for a guy who doesn't like to talk, but he loves to perform. That's another sort of paradox. He loves to perform and entertain people. He just doesn't like to talk when he's not performing.
Yeah. Well, the thing you mentioned when you started off saying that other people talk. He doesn't want to talk about it. He doesn't want to talk about his family because he's afraid he's going to hurt somebody's feelings and stuff. He doesn't want to talk about his father because he thinks it's being unfair to his father. But
he has written songs that you're pretty sure are
he can
about
write
his
it
father.
in a song, but he doesn't want to say it in a quote. Okay, and so he's very, very. And so time went on in doing the book. I would bring these things up, and finally he started getting irritated because he thought I was being unfair. Why do you keep asking me that? And it's questions you and I would only think are natural questions. But see, this is an area that he doesn't want to be touched about. So, and one day, I'm 3/4, 4/5 of the way through the book, finished. I'm kind of frustrated because I'm not getting that thing about his real feelings in life. And he says, are you going to talk to my kids? And when he said that, I thought, oh, yeah, I'll say hello to him. I'll be friendly, nice to meet you. Because in my whole lifetime of writing about stars, none of them ever wanted you to talk to their family because they didn't want them to say something that was going to blow their image, that was going to be this and that. They weren't used to dealing with, reporters who were probing through their life. And so when I started talking to the kids, they started from the first second telling me all the questions I had asked Randy, they started answering them. Not because they thought they were doing him a favor, they were just answering the questions. He has 5 children, and the great thing is they all said the same thing. If they had said different things, how do you pick? But they all said the same thing, and so did his wife, and so did Lenny. So I had those 7 people.
Yeah, you even talked to his first wife, right?
No, she passed away. I never met her. No, but these other 7 were, and when I went to see Randy again, I was a little bit how do I bring this up to him that these people have told me all the stuff you don't want to say? And I said a couple things to him, and he said, he was fine with it. It's okay. He's not afraid of the truth as long as someone else says it.
Yeah, he didn't turn the rock over himself.
Yeah. No, that was very, very important to him and stuff. And after he wrote Rednecks, which was this incredible song, that would, maybe another songwriter would have gone on. Okay, but again, his purpose is to explain problems in America. That's the goal. I mean, that's not his purpose, but it's his inner. That's what drives him, and he does a whole album that tries to tell us more about the narrator of Rednecks. He tries to tell how he became that way and stuff, and it's just a remarkable record. Louisiana's in there. It's all about how, over and over again, greed of people, rich people not paying attention to poor people, and the government failing to take advantage, and I mean to help.
Take responsibility.
Yeah.
One of the more interesting passages in your book, if you really want to try to understand the Newman family and the Newman legacy and what the art that they give to the world, but then how they protect themselves personally, is when you talk about how Thomas walks. Okay, So Randy's uncle Alfred has two kids who are also composers and conductors.
Yeah, very, very
Thomas
good.
and David.
Very good.
And Thomas lives near Randy and walks his dog by. And he's afraid to bother Randy and say, "Hey, cuz, how you doing?" And Randy sees him walk by and says, "Oh, I guess Thomas doesn't want to say hi."
Yeah. And so I don't think Thomas likes me. Because
Thomas has had an amazing career himself. I mean, he scored Shawshank Redemption, Horse Whisperer, American Beauty, The Green Mile, Road to Redemption, Finding Nemo.
Yeah,
I mean,
fantastic.
is there any sort of cousin rivalry there? Or
well, I thought when I wanted to talk to Thomas, I contacted his office saying, would you mind talking? And he said, well, he's busy on a film now. Get back in 6 months. Okay, so 6 months later I call. He's working on another film. Get back in 3 months. I thought there was this, that he didn't want to get involved. He didn't want to talk about it. So finally we get a thing. And again, he lives 4 blocks from Randy. And I go in there and I'm thinking, now how is this going to start? How is he going to be? He starts talking from the first minute I sat down for 20 minutes about how much he adores Randy, he loves Randy's music, and he comes up with a thing. It was something I had thought about in my own mind, that has Randy passed Alfred Newman, okay? Now, Randy's gotten 22 film nominations, I think, for music, and I think he's won 2.
Let's just go into the Newman wing of Ancestry.com.
Wait. Before you do that, let him finish that thought.
Oh, no.
Because it's something that Thomas told him.
Okay, go.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm thinking, Alfred could never write these songs. This is a whole different thing. Randy is the greatest Newman of all, okay?
That's what Thomas said.
But I can't say that in the book because it sounds like...
No, but what you're saying is Thomas said that about Randy rather than his father.
Yeah,
he put Randy ahead of his own father.
So I'm talking to, and Thomas finally says, somebody asked me, he says, when I think about it, Randy is the greatest Newman of all. So to have him say it, that works perfectly because he says, my father could never write these songs. Nobody could write these songs. Nobody today can write these songs.
Yeah, and so Uncle Alfred won 9 Academy Awards, 45 nominations. Uncle Lionel, brother of Alfred, won a Best Musical Academy Award for Hello, Dolly. Thomas, I just read, Shawshank, a total of 95 nominations in the Newman family. And
they've done over 300 scores.
Cow.
I think.
And then...
Alfred was the king of Hollywood. He was the boss at 20th Century Fox. All About Eve, all those movies. He either decided who did it or he would do it himself. So he was, no one could touch him. Someone might say there were better composers, but no one wielded the power.
Yeah. So his first experience with a score was for Pixar, right? For the Toy Story, wasn't that?
Well, no. He early on. See, as soon as he did his first 2 albums. People start. Well, that's Newman. That's the son. I mean, that's the nephew of Alfred Newman.
Right. Mm.
We ought to get him to try. So, what's the guy's name who did Norman Lear. He gets them to do a movie called Cold Turkey.
Oh, right.
To do the music for it. And Randy's starting out. He kind of goes through it. It's okay. It's okay. But and then he's not totally happy with it. So he doesn't do another for several years. Then he does Ragtime. And then he does The Natural.
That was huge, though.
Yeah, then The Natural was really a beautiful score. And so he doesn't get the confidence. He had to make 9 albums before he got the confidence. I'm going to go over now and devote time.
That's what I was going to say.
And that's when he starts doing, and in that process, because in that process, his agent one day says, they want you to do a movie at Pixar. Animated movies? I don't know that. It doesn't. To most people, an animated film isn't maybe what a regular film is. I think in terms of prestige and all that kind of stuff. And this was in the early days of it. But he finally goes, and John Lasseter, who was an amazing interview, he's got this passion just like Randy. He brings him in, tells him about the movie and stuff, and the agent said, I could see Randy getting more and more excited, his eyes and stuff. And on the way out, he says, let's do this. And then a few months later, then the first thing he does, Randy finds it very easy to write songs for movies because, see, the difficulty of writing is coming with the subject and then figuring a way to say it. But in a movie song, he just asked the director, what kind of song do you want? I want a song about friendship. That night he writes, You've Got a Friend in Me. And he does that over and over and over again. The sad thing is, he got stereotyped as a comic. So people who were making comedy movies tended to go to him and not people who made dramas, which was a better challenge for a composer. And finally, he even the Pixar movies, which he loved doing, and he started making $1 million a picture with those things. He was making more money than he ever made in the record business. He tells his agent one day, there's 2 things that are funny. The agent takes him to see the first early rushes of Toy Story. And Randy, funny as it can be, takes his wallet out and puts it on the table and says, this movie is going to be very kind to you. And then the other thing was, after doing so many though, and then doing things like Leatherheads and Meet the Falkers and these maverick, mediocre movies, he asked his agent, do you think you can find me something else, something more than a tune or these things? And it's not until Marriage Story that he really got another one. He wanted to do movies like Out of Africa and, thinking that had a lot more sweep and drama to them.
But I guess what I was going for, but you proved me wrong even in my assumption, was that where he wanted to avoid his family legacy just being the score guy, he went to the pop with Lenny Waronker. And then after he got comfortable with his own talent and comfortable with having some success in scoring, then he didn't mind doing it. Then he conquered it.
Well, he was confident then. I think there's a challenge. I've got this. I've always been afraid of this. I think I can do this now. And he did it so well. He was so good at it. In that period, he did maybe 15, 16, 17 films and only 3 albums in like a 20-year period. And some people thought he was never going to make another album. But at some point, he realized he went back to his original motivation. And to him, the songs are much more important than the film music. He calls those are my significant songs, and I wanted to get back to that.
Well, what you express really well in the book is how once he had established some success and a lot of success and a lot of pride in what he'd accomplished, he could relax more and relax into the project without so much terror that he wasn't going to be good enough.
Yeah.
Like he get like the way that you describe him today is that it seems as though he's at peace with all that he's accomplished, and that
he didn't need Lenny to say you're great anymore. He knew he was really good. And then the great thing, the final piece of his life is he decides to go back and write songs again. And he makes 3 albums, and he's 60 years old now, okay? And in pop music, once you get past 35 or 40, I don't care if you're Paul McCartney, I don't care if you're who you are, it really starts tailing off. Either because you got too much money, you don't have the passion, you're too lazy, but it falls off. You don't expect people to make music, and he makes 3 records that are as good as any of the first 3 records he made, and that's remarkable. It's
he stretched his writing talent. He wrote Faust, the musical, which played at the Globe Theater in San Diego, and so he got comfortable enough to test his talent in other ways.
Yeah, he was interested in things. I mean, he wanted he always loved. He says, if I had been in New York, I might have written just for the theater. I didn't grow up in a theater community here. It's not Broadway, and so it's a little distant to me. So it's a Hollywood, so I go into movies and music and that kind of stuff. But he really had an interest, and he thought that the musicals of the last 20 years were just terrible. Cats and all these things. He just thinks he liked musicals of the 50s and stuff and 60s. But so he said, let me try my hand at that. And he really loves that Faust, even though it was not a success.
It never went anywhere. It was
no, it went here in, I think, Chicago, and it never got to Broadway.
Did he have ever a writing partner, somebody that was always
back when that first publishing company that he was at, Jackie DeShannon, she was the pop singer, Needles and Pens, but he never had, and Bobby Darin, he kind of co-wrote a song for. He probably wrote it and Darin put his name on it. Paul Simon just came out and sang on a song. But with a person like that, you really can't have it, because it's such a different, unique
His
vision.
music was his and his lyrics were his, and he had to have both of them.
Yeah.
Well, Randy Newman fans are brilliant and informed and very protective of his legacy. How are they reacting to the book?
Well, the fans have been great.
Yeah.
But the trouble is, what my goal is, the book was a crusade, really, because when you do the Cash book and the Simon book, they've already got an audience. You don't have to spend as much time talking about the music and why it's so good. In this book, you see, I have a lot of lyrics, a lot of songs, because people don't know these songs, so I'm trying to really get them interested in them. And so that's why also I had a strategy, and this backfired kind of in a way. I said, I was thinking to myself, how can I get people to pay attention to Randy and believe all this stuff I'm writing? Well, if I get a person they respect to write something, a testimonial to Randy, they might be more likely to listen to him if they respect that person. So Bob Dylan, Paul Simon, Don Henley, Linda Ronstadt, Thomas Friedman, the op-ed, Wesley Morris, Greil Marcus, Bob Christgau, songwriters and critics, and I have that through the book. And a couple of reviewers, though, thought I was padding the book and just being too loving to him. It says, he has all these flattering comments by admirers. All these admirers were Bob Dylan.
Here's what Bruce
testimony.
Springsteen said. Yeah. Bruce Springsteen said, Randy Newman is the great master of the American song and songwriting.
Look at Trudeau. Is Trudeau on there?
I don't have that.
Oh, okay. Well, Trudeau said he's the master of satire of our time, something like that. I mean, Gary Trudeau in Doonesbury saying he's the master.
Who is the master of satire?
Yeah.
But I always, I was saying to this to you before the podcast, that I protected my relationship with Randy, not knowing him early in my life, because I thought I was so smart that I was the only person that got him, because his political commentary is often subtle. His satire is often subtle. I mean, people like short people missed it completely. I Love L.A., they missed it completely. They were great, iconic songs, but the truth was there was an undertone of satire. But I'll tell you, I was in the Navy, and I was driving home in my 72 Volkswagen Super Beetle, and I'm coming from Norfolk, Virginia, and suddenly this radio station comes on and plays the Three Dog Night version of Mama Told Me Not to Come, and I thought I was going to have a heart attack. I said, my taste has arrived. He's made it to this, which might be his funniest song ever.
Yeah.
So you already knew Randy's version when that happened?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Like reading your book, there were songs like "Just One Smile" or "Dayton, Ohio" that were deep cuts for me on other albums that I enjoyed by other artists, and I had no idea that they were Randy Newman compositions.
Yes, well, see, I was one thing when you're a music critic at a paper, you realize after you get away, you've got a day at the most to listen to an album and make your judgment up in writing a story. Okay, write a review. And so you kind of do the best you can. You get a surface. I gave good reviews to every album he made. But I realized when I started going through it all, I didn't know a tenth of his songs, and I didn't realize often what the purpose was. I thought they were just good songs. I didn't realize that there was this constant pattern to what he was trying to do. You know, I didn't know Louisiana. I mean, I'd written it's a nice song, but I didn't understand the importance of it and stuff. And that's the same with even the most he ever sold with one album was 700,000. Okay, now we take that. The Eagles sell 20 million. Fleetwood Mac, which was on Warner Brothers, sells 20 million. James Taylor sells. So this is nobody. He's not reaching anybody. You know, he has 3 songs that are maybe famous on the radio. So, so there's so few people who know these things, and that's what, again, the challenge and the title even. Oh, that was one thing.
I love the title.
The reaction you said from fans.
Yeah.
They love the book. They're just so pleased. They're so thrilled to have their hero written about, I think.
Yeah.
But several of them said, "Why did you pick that title?"
It's a great title.
I know. But I said, "Well, what would you pick?" He said, "Well, short people." Or "You've got a friend in me."
Yeah.
See?
It's too on the nose.
We wanted a serious book. We
superficial.
wanted it to be presented so that a book critic and bookstore buyer and fan would all. And like the picture on the back is he's got his head in his hands. It looks he's so suffering. You don't know if he's tired or suffering or tortured.
Show us. Hold it up.
Yeah. This picture. We actually wanted that for the cover, but the publisher said, "No, you can't see his
That kind of
face."
looks like some of his lyrics. That's okay.
But
you have great titles, like your John Lennon book was Cornflakes with John Lennon.
Yeah, that was.
I love that.
But this was it wanted to be a different kind of title, and it was my agent who came up with the title. It was a great title because he has a song, New York Times. That again, see, this song is such a brilliant. It's a brilliant answer to the government's policy during an era that the New York Times said, let's run that the day after Bush's State of the Union as an alternative State of the Union. I mean, that's pretty amazing. That's pretty amazing.
So what you have in the book is a lot of lyrics, and what we can do now in this digital age is I would get to the lyrics, and then I pull it up on Spotify. And I would listen while I was looking at the lyrics, because we often listen to songs and don't really hear them.
Yeah, so how did that work?
Wonderful.
Really? No, I've had 3 or 4 people mention that they're doing that. I would never think of doing that.
If you go to YouTube and listen to his music, it's never been more valuable in its commentary than it is right now.
Yeah.
I mean, it plays perfectly into this current.
Yeah. I mean, it's again. I mean, it just seemed to me just a brilliant idea. I mean, it was such a deserving thing, getting people to greater appreciate and understand. But it's a challenge, because you have to really read it seriously, to get people can get impatient with all the lyrics and just start skipping through those.
You know what would be wonderful in terms of like presentation, if it were possible, is in the audiobook version, which your son reads, correct?
Yeah, you did a really good job.
Right, that if the song would play. I guess there'd be a rights issue, but instead of people having to toggle back.
Publishers don't like that kind of thing for some reason. I don't know what it is. Because
it'd be a mixed media experience, and it'd be wonderful.
Yeah, but when I did the Johnny Cash book, I tried to get him to take all the songs from it and give it with, and they just don't want to. It's like it is they're separate worlds. They don't want to get involved.
One day.
Yeah.
So
that would have been a great idea.
Your first experience was reviewing his show at the Troubadour in 1970?
Yeah.
And so was that the beginning of your relationship with Randy?
Yeah.
How was that experience being down there?
Well, that was beginning of my relationship, too. I was still a freelance writer at the paper. And so this 1970 was a really important year because I saw 3 great artists at the Troubadour 2 months after. Randy first, Chris Christopherson second as the opening act. Can you imagine an opening act coming out and singing Me and Bobby McGee, Sunday morning coming down, and then 2 months later Elton John.
Wow.
And that was an amazing
And that was his birth. That concert was his birth. Now you're, and I don't want to put you on the spot here, your reviews back in the days when print journalism mattered were often said to be launch points for careers. Like the first review you gave to Springsteen apparently was a huge bump in his career.
Well, yeah, because there weren't the power of the critic has greatly diminished now, because in those days, if you wanted to see Springsteen, you came out of the Forum or Sports Arena, it would be 2 days before you could read about what happened, because the paper has already been put to bed. And so, but today you can come out of the Forum if you want to go to a Taylor Swift concert, and within a minute you can have 50,000 people telling you how the concert was. I mean, you just can't. Papers can't compete with that. So off and on, critics more and more papers are just not running reviews.
What's the most important review you think you've written? The most consequential?
Well,
Elton John?
I mean, Elton John had the most impact because he became a star just somewhat overnight. And I didn't realize, but the record company was really ready. They really believed in him. And when that review came, they sent it to every critic in the country, every DJ in the country. And they took out a page ad in music papers in England and ran it. So it was just a saturation, and it was so unusual in 1970 to have newspapers writing that much about somebody. It was really a perfect storm for the thing.
And I must say that my first exposure to the Randy Newman book was seeing you at the Writers Guild with Bernie Taupin, who was your co-host for that event.
Yeah.
And he got to ask you questions, and he's got a great kind of a snarky sense of humor, and you two were great together. And then you explained this to me earlier today, where he doesn't like the limelight at all. It was so interesting that he's written some of the most powerful words in the history of music, and he chooses to be back here and not up here.
Yeah, it was funny because someone who was at that show said, "Oh, Bernie was just so great." So I went up to him afterward, and he just didn't even want to.
He didn't want to hear about it.
He didn't. He doesn't. I kept saying, "Bernie, I love your music," and he just kept walking away. But he was doing. He was trying to be a good soldier on stage, and he was trying to help me out, and
allowing you to have the moment. Yeah.
Maybe he doesn't. Maybe that's the way he reacts in public, but it does actually mean something to him. He just doesn't know how to reveal that.
Oh no, he's happy for the success.
Yeah.
But he doesn't know how to deal with it if someone comes up and wants him to talk about it.
Has he ever written for anybody else?
Oh yeah, he did a few. They broke up for a few years, and he wrote a couple hits with some other groups, but nothing I remember.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Jefferson Starship he wrote a song for, and I think he might have done something with Alice Cooper, but no success that in my mind. They might have been hits, I don't know. But that was another question. What's the most consequential? I don't know. I can't have what are.
I think historically it's the Bruce Springsteen one. That was the one.
But he was already, the East Coast critics loved him.
Okay.
See, by the time what was important about mine was it showed the record company that he could be a success outside of New York and New Jersey. So that was a huge, so they really up his, I've had lots of phone calls where people say that review saved my career. Tom Petty's wife called after his first album came out. He was going to almost be dropped by the record company and wrote this big review. So that was, and another guy you probably haven't heard of, Joe Ely, who's a country artist. There was a meeting that morning to be dropped, and it was the Palomino, and there was a review. So you find things like that people talk about. But in terms of, the funny thing about the Elton John thing, once it became so successful, and I'd only been in the paper as full-time for 2 months, okay? And I'm thinking, wow, there's a lot of power you have here. This is really great. But someone told me, very important guy, David Geffen said, but you got to remember, you've only got one shot at that. If you make the mistake next time, it goes away, that power. If you don't pick the right person. So I waited 1.5 years before I found somebody that I thought was worthy of that kind of endorsement. I passed on Cat Stevens. I passed on James Taylor. John Prine was the guy.
Great writer.
And it taught me you can't predict success because his voice was too country for pop, too pop for country. But I mean, the respect, though, Dylan and Springsteen and everybody, they all love this guy, and he never made a bad album. I just love John Prine.
Was that the biggest surprise? Who were you surprised at their lack of getting traction with the public? Somebody you saw when you thought, man, this person is destined for...
Well, John Prine.
Yeah.
John Prine. I mean, Christopherson, he sent me an advance copy of John's album. I got it, when I got home one night, I listened to it from midnight to 4 a.m, over and over and over again. I went to the paper the next day and was quoting the lyrics, all the songs. Broken hearts and dirty windows make life difficult to see. God, those are just incredible.
Yeah,
and
Bonnie Raitt, I guess, recorded "Women." What's in that song?
"Angel from Montgomery."
Yeah.
And also Bette Midler did Hello in there and stuff.
Yeah,
but he was just, he was magical.
Yeah.
And so that was the biggest disappointment, that he didn't become bigger. But there's a lot of British bands I like. Jesus and Mary Chain, Stone Roses. They didn't become successful in America. They were successful. So, but John was the one that I would have bet anything on. But again, it taught you can predict talent, but you can't predict success.
Yeah, because that's the public is the other part of that equation. And you went through the whole Sunset Boulevard, 70s, Roxy, Troubadour, all that, all those clubs down there, and that whole period that gave birth to, Guns N' Roses and the Doors and all that stuff. How was that? Talk about that period.
Well, it was so amazing. You could walk outside the Whiskey at night and you'd bump into a great new band that was waiting outside to try to get on the stage. And you could go from the Troubadour to the Whiskey, see the first show and then just go up to Ohini and see the Whiskey. Then eventually the Roxy comes in. It was just magical. And I'm doing, for that radio show I do, it's 88.5, the SoCal sound. That's their. I was doing recently for a young person today. Well, what was rock and roll? So I'm going to play the best rock and roll from each decade to see how it evolved. So I start with the 50s and I have one show. I do the 60s and I have one show. I get to the 70s, it takes two shows. I mean, we always think of the 60s as the great, but the 70s, I mean, that's when you think of it, Neil Young becomes known. Springsteen comes
we get
along.
more of the singer-songwriters expressing their own.
Yeah, Elton, Carole King, Randy Newman,
Right.
On and on and on. I had to do I was going to do 3 shows for that period. Now the 80s is good, and then it starts dropping off in the 90s, and by the 2000, rock and roll's gone. It's teen pop, it's TikTok, it's.
You answered my question. I wanted to know if is the advertisement of the death of rock and roll premature, or is it over? Everything's electronic.
I mean, look, it's fascinating if you look back how long rock and roll lasts. Swing lasted 3 years. We think of that as a huge, but I think that's correct. 3 years. Sinatra's thing was a couple of years. I mean, his swooning, all the girls swooning on, then he comes back as a more mature person. These things don't last. Rock and roll lasted 50 years, and by that time, it should change. I mean, kids should want something different from their parents and stuff. But here, you had kids, you had parents and kids liking rock and roll for a while. But and then when I finished Cornflakes, which was kind of a memoir, I kind of said rock and roll's dead. This was like 2007, and it's not coming back. There's still bands out there playing it, but no one cares about it. It's in the attitude of the listener. The attitude of the listener somehow thinks it was probably naive that we sat around listening to Dylan and Lennon and people like that telling us about their lives and what we should be in society. We don't want that. We want to be entertained. I think that's a lot of Madonna. Madonna becomes as influential as Springsteen probably, because she brings in this dance stuff and Britney Spears and all that kind of stuff. And I still can't deal with Taylor Swift, and I don't know how good she is. She doesn't speak to me. That's all I can say. But the most vital one thing that's often misunderstood is hip hop. When hip hop started in the 80s, they had an NWA from out here, Ice Cube, Eminem comes along. People generally didn't like it, adults, just like they didn't like rock and roll in the 50s. But it was street music. It was speaking about the times, and some of the artists were very, very good. And today, hip-hop is really became the dominant sound for the last few years, and it's tailed off a bit now. But a lot of it was no good at all, but Kendrick Lamar, the best of it. But even at the best of it, I don't prize it as much because it's not my story they're telling. It's not my life. It's telling their life, and that's fantastic because we haven't heard that, but I just don't relate to it the way I relate to Lennon and Springsteen and Dylan and those people. And
it's
Randy.
Amazing how hip-hop has permeated all cultures now.
Yeah.
That you have that girl,
TV advertising.
Tyla, who's a South African, and she's fantastic. And you have, some of these hip-hop artists from Germany and France, and you watch them perform, and they look like somebody out of South Central Los Angeles. How did that happen?
Yeah. It's because it's popular. I mean, that's what look at rock and roll. They had people from all Australia and stuff like that. But it was, hip hop is a great great. And you don't need a band. You can just say it. You know, it's
poetry. It's powerful. I think our attention is very diffused. We're not all looking in the same direction. And also, when we're listening individually, our attention is diffused. We could be multitasking. We could be playing a video game. We could be, just it's not as precious. When you bought an album, you sat alone and you held the album.
And when maybe see was the big vinyl album,
right?
Because that was so good. You turn and look at it and read
and it was an impersonal investment.
Yeah.
It was a personal investment.
And also, see, Spotify, you don't need.
Right.
All you can do is you can get anything you want. In those days, you had to save $3 or $4.
You had to walk across
really
the room and pick up
the
the needle if you wanted the music to stop. Now you simply tap.
Yeah. But now you don't have CDs are worthless now. It's the Spotify thing. It's the thing in your ear, and you
right. But the point I'm making is music was more intentional when we were in the 70s and the 80s. It was very intentional that you owned an album or that your friend had an album and said, "Come over, let's listen," and that was what you did for the next couple of hours.
And you had your T-shirt. You had all this stuff. Yeah.
And it was a poster on your wall. It was a part of this represents who I am in the world.
Yeah, and music, particularly. Woodstock and Haight-Ashbury and Crosby, Stills and Nash, they sort of dictated the morality of the time. I mean, kids were learning how to live and be free and respect their fellow.
And take drugs and
yeah, all that too. That's absolutely true. But I mean, it seemed like the music was more important.
Well, what
socially.
mattered to them? There wasn't social media telling them what opinion to form about a certain topic.
Yeah, but
lyrics in a song.
But see, again, all that. To think of an audience today, if we've had the progressive wing of politics, those were all white people telling us how that we should behave. So we don't want to hear that anymore. We want more diverse. We want more black artists in pop. We want more hip hop. That's a part of the equation too.
Right.
What about the future of rock journalism? Is there anybody whose work you enjoyed? I have Rolling Stone on my news feed on my phone, and I think they get some good inside stories. They get good inside political stories on Rolling Stone, actually.
Well, I hate to kind of say this because there's a lot of good young rock writers, but if I wanted to read about an artist, New Yorker has somebody. And Amanda, and I always mispronounce her last name, so I won't even do it. But if you go to the New York Times the New Yorker website, Amanda, she is incredible. I think she's just so passionate. She can keep up on all different styles. But there's a lot of good ones. There are not nearly as many, but there's several good ones in the many. But the New Yorker. Amanda is the one I would go to first.
Other than the Times, they're gone from local papers are disintegrating, but there's nobody that did what you did, was own a region of the United States.
Well, no, but Michael Wood is good at the LA Times. He's a good critic and stuff. But the paper, there's just not the ambition. If there was a show opening, if a new artist opened a tour in Miami, I'd be there that night. Now you don't spend the money to do that. It's not as big and important. Well, first of all, circulation is way down. But secondly, it's too expensive to go do that. Although Michael did go cover the final show of Taylor Swift's tour in Vancouver because it's such a big thing. But it's a smaller world. Fewer people are reading critics, and fewer papers are spending much space on critics.
It's becoming so niche.
Either there or the person, their friends on social media.
Sure. You quote Connor Friedersdorf essay in The Atlantic, and he says that no one's work has done more to anticipate the tragic comic place the United States finds itself in today. What does Randy say at the present date when he was the one who was the most prescient regarding, let's say, the fissures at the core of the health of the United States?
He wouldn't tell you.
He wouldn't?
I don't want to tell you. I don't want to say what I feel. I mean, it's private. I mean, he doesn't want to be a target. He doesn't want
because the way you end your book is a political statement.
Yeah, but if you read through there, it took a lot of time. He had told me, I had asked him several times, because I wanted to end the book with like 2 or 3 pages of him talking about the country today. And so it doesn't happen because he doesn't want to be a spokesman. He doesn't want to be a political make statements. He wants to write songs. And he thinks so he finally said something he had said earlier. He had told me 2 years before, it's the same quote about the world today. And I start walking out, and that he's always optimistic, but he's never seen it this bad. And then I'm walking out, and he says, wait a second. And he finally says, this is as bold as he wants to be. I just can't imagine the country voting again for someone so crooked.
I think that you could hear that statement made all over the United States.
But I'm saying that's as bold as he wants to be.
Yeah,
and that took an hour.
Wow.
Pretty much to get.
He has not been in good health. He broke his neck, and he said hip issues.
He's had
how is he, without being too personal, how is he now? And is there any chance that he would ever get out in front of a piano?
Well, when you say break his neck, he's had 6 or 7 back and neck operations, knee operations. Some of the neck was 10 hours in length, and so the recovery period would be. The book took a long time waiting for him to get better. He had a knee operation and made him better. He has to have another on the other knee, and he looks for it. What he thinks he can first do if he gets his health back is be on stage. That's what writing an album is so hard and stuff.
Yeah.
But he loves the idea of getting on stage. He loves the applause, loves speaking to the audience.
He's a very entertaining performer.
Yeah.
His last album was 2017, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And no recordings since then, unreleased recordings. Has he done any work in the studio?
He did a thing for KPCC. What?
Yeah.
That it was be careful because of the pandemic. So this was 2020. Mm-hmm. That was the last thing they got any attention. He hasn't released any record or not. And he hopes he can, but I don't know. It's hard because it's physically it's hard for him.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything else we should know? Where can folks find the book? Where can they find you speaking more about the book? What else should we share?
I don't know. I just appreciate you having me.
Next book. Are you working on anything yet?
I don't know who's next. It's so hard to pick your topic. And the thing I did, again, I was looking for people who I consider statesmen. I don't want to write about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I want to write songwriters who made significant statements, and I'm looking for a person who will talk to me about it. I don't want to just read about the person. I'd love to do Dylan. You can't do Dylan because he's not going to let you get inside his world enough.
He'll bullshit you for the entire interview.
Well, no. I found one of the best interviews in terms of favorite interviews I ever did. Before I left the Times, the assistant editor came to me, is there some series you would like to do before you left? And I said, I'd like to write a series of 5,000 words each of great songwriters about the creative process, not their life, not their drugs, not their family, but just the process. So I did Lucinda Williams, Joni Mitchell, Merle Haggard, U2, Bono, Ice Cube, and Dylan. Okay, and Dylan agreed to do it. I didn't think he was going to do it because some days he's the friendliest guy, some days he's off in his own world. But he did. So I fly to Amsterdam, not knowing how much time he's going to spend with me. And I go to his hotel room. I walk in, he's sitting there with his guitar in his hand with cookies and milk on the thing, and he starts talking to me about why he still wanted to write songs. And it's going great, I can't believe how great. And after an hour, I don't know if I told this, after an hour, there's a knock on the door, and his road manager comes in, and that's the way they can get out of an interview. They say, oh, I'm sorry, you've got another appointment now. And so I'm sitting there on pins and needles, and Dylan goes, give us another hour.
Really?
Oh, can you believe that? Okay, so the guy goes away. He keeps talking. He talks about how he wanted to be nothing more than Woody Guthrie. He wanted to just do Guthrie songs in clubs. I couldn't, and he's doing it. He does really well at it. And one night a guy comes in and says to the club, says, you did a good job, Bob, but there's a guy down in the streets doing the same thing. And that was Rambling Jack Elliott. Oh. And so he finally realized he's got to write songs, and he studies poetry and studies music from around the world and reads poetry and says, you've got to have a song, you've got to say something different and meaningful and turn things around, make people think about it. I mean, he's spelling all this stuff that he had never really gone into in his life. He's so private. And the one thing was, he said, I'm a wordsmith. I don't write music. I'll get an idea and I'll think of a song like Night and Day by Cole Porter, and I'll start transferring the words, and it'll change a little bit. Then we'll put a guitar thing, and it'll sound different. I said, well, what was the song for Blowing in the Wind? And he says, it was an old Scottish folk song. Well, what was Subterranean Homesick Blues? And he goes, Too Much Monkey Business by Chuck Berry.
Wow.
But anyway, so at the end of that evening, remember, he sent the guy away for an hour and said, we're good for the night. Mm-hmm. At the end of the evening, I've got 6 hours of stuff. It's fantastic. And he said, are you coming to the show tomorrow night? And I say, yes. And he said, well, let's get together again after the show in case you come up with some more questions after you listen to the tape. And so it was just, he can be that gracious. That was my favorite. Mojo called it the greatest Dylan interview ever.
Oh, my.
And so that was my favorite single interview.
And as a journalist, you're supposed to keep a distance between you and your subject. Yeah. But is there anyone that you've interviewed in your career where you went on to have a long-standing friendship and intimate friendship?
Well, it's hard because that's one of the big rules, and you can't become friends with the artist, because I didn't want to ever go backstage and hang out and that kind of stuff. But invariably, you've got to find a certain. There was nobody ever where I would call him up or go out to dinner with. John Lennon was the first one. Okay, John called one day and said, "We want to go to dinner tonight at Mr. Chow's in Beverly Hills," and I didn't know particularly why, but I learned late. And we'd go to dinner a couple times, and I saw him again in New York just before he died. He was great. John was just the greatest. He wasn't. You didn't have to talk about the Beatles and tell him how good he was. He was just great. And the reason I found out that he did that in large part was this was the time he was on drinking too much. He was away from Yoko. He had a business meeting the next morning and didn't want to go with Harry and Ringo because they would drink too much and he'd be drunk. And I drank Diet Coke. And so that was one of the reasons. But there are people you become. Bernie is we email all the time.
He seems very down to earth.
Very what?
Bernie seems very down to earth.
Oh yes, he is. Yeah, he lives out. He is. He's the brown dirt cowboy. That's his Captain Fantastic.
Have you written about Jackson Browne?
No. And Jackson's very good. I talked to him for this book, and he was great. I didn't know him much. I did a couple of interviews, but he wasn't the best interviewer and stuff. And sometimes it's unfairly or unfairly, Prine was my guy. So he was the songwriter I was following. So Jackson I would listen to. This guy's pretty good, but Prine's the one that you want. Yeah. And so now I can appreciate Jackson more.
He's quite an important voice.
Yes, and he's a wonderful guy. Yeah. Wonderful guy. I was really impressed, but he's just loves Randy.
Can you believe Dylan still tours? That guy is he's unbelievable.
For the first couple of years, I couldn't understand it. He's got enough money, he's got enough this and that, but that's him. He loves it. What are you going to do? What's he going to do if he doesn't do that? He's going to sit at home? He loves that crowd, loves to do his music. He's a committed musician. He's a songwriter. He's not a fake. That's his life.
I think we have to close by asking you to tell about Folsom Prison and
yes.
And how old were you? And you were.
Well, let's see. I was. I guess in 1968. I was 29. I'd worked in a newspaper. I had a family, but I was doing these freelance stories for the Times, and I heard that Johnny Cash was going to play Folsom Prison, and Columbia did not want to tell any reporter that he was playing there because they had tried to do a prison concert before, and he showed up drunk or stoned, and it was all embarrassing. So they didn't tell any. But a disc jockey, a country station, told me about it. He invited me to go up with it, and that's I got to see that show, and I wrote this great Sunday calendar story, and that album becomes a huge record. He has a TV show, and that was one of the reasons I got hired, I think, by the paper, because they thought this guy he knows what's going on.
That was the big launch for him too, right?
For Cash, yeah. He was struggling. If he knew it. He was on drugs. He was still taking drugs.
Yeah.
That movie, I Walk the Line, was a fairy tale. That wasn't really a very real story. But he was still on drugs when he went to Folsom Prison. But he knew that this was if he failed, it was his last chance. But see, he had been in prison, or he had been in jail, and these prisoners sensed them. There was this great rapport. And
that was when you realized that he really was a voice for the common man, because they were responding to everything he sang.
Yeah. But the great thing,
I shot a man just to watch him die, and the whole place erupts into applause.
Yeah, I remember when I first heard that on the radio. Can you say that in the song?
Right.
But that was the thing about John, is that he could go anywhere. He could go to the White House. He could go to a union meeting. He could go to a IBM boardroom meeting, the Indian reservation. Everywhere he went, people thought he was one of them. He had this a great sense of compassion and empathy, and people believed him. And that was, he wasn't a great songwriter, but he stood for something, and that was what attracted me to him, to the book.
Well, it's an honor to talk to you.
Yes,
Bob, I've been reading you for years, and I've been a big fan of Randy's. This is a great meeting of wishes for me.
And let me tell you, if you met Randy, you would adore him.
Oh, I'm sure I would. I love his sense of humor.
He's such a nice guy.
Next time you go over, just pop by and we'll hop in.
I was going to say, he's such a nice guy, but he's difficult for a book writer, but he's a wonderful person.
A one-on-one with people that don't have a...
Yeah, because again, he doesn't want to be... He's
I'm not surprised, though, because that's his humor.
I mean, those songs, they're all written to help the underdog. There's a purpose. They're not just written to have a hit. And he can't write hits, except for the ones for the movies.
He wrote what matters to him.
That's what and it should matter to us. That's what
I always respected about him. He almost didn't care what the reaction of the song was going to be. He did it to get it out of his own soul.
Well, and a lot of people would complain, we can't understand what this song is about. But he said, I can understand where they say that, but I'm not going to change it. This is exactly what I want to say. I hope they understand. I'm not trying to trick them. I'm not trying to put them down. I'm not trying to show how smart I am. But this is, he's like a painter who's not going to change his canvas.
That's his perspective.
So this is okay. This is part one now. We'll do part.
We'll do part two. This was going to require 2 parts, like the 70s. And this is me reading our credits, so bear with me. Thank you for coming along down the Media Path. You will find us on Instagram and Blue Sky, where we are at Media Path Pod, and on Facebook, where our show page is Media Path Podcast, and our Facebook group is Media Path with Fritz and Wheezy Podcast Community. We are also a video podcast on YouTube, where you get to look at us and judge us. And you get all kinds of added bonus visual treats on our YouTube videos. You can watch, like, and subscribe at Media Path Podcast on YouTube. You can write to us at MediaPathPodcast@gmail.com. Tell us what you've been watching, reading, and enjoying. Kindly give us a nice rating wherever you get your podcasts, and share our social media posts if you would be so kind, because that is a big help to us. My TikTok is Louise Palanker. Fritz's TikTok is Fritz Coleman on the TikTok. Check there for clips and special features. There's something crazy going on Fritz's TikTok today, where he's dressed like Santa or an elf or somebody. But you can see all kinds of behind-the-scenes adventures there on our TikToks. Our website is MediaPathPodcast.com, and there you can catch up on old episodes and binge our spicy newsletter. It's loaded with photos and quizzes and backstage gossip. We want to thank our wonderful guest, Robert Hilburn. Our team includes producer Dina Friedman, John Maddox, Bill Filipiak, Mason Brown, Raf Rusak, Jordan Reyes, Nick Broussard, and you. Our theme music is by me and John Maddox. I am Louise Palanker, here with Fritz Coleman and Robert Hilburn. Be well and wise, and we will see you along the Media Path. I have to read it every week, so I